Hello, happy Thursday. Thank you for joining me, everyone. My name is Alyssa Thomas from Penguin and Fish, where we make lovely and quirky hand embroidery kits. And I am here every weekday at 8:30 p.m. Central Time. And it's a time when we can relax and craft together for about an hour, and we work on projects from beginning to end. And today is Thursday, and Thursday means it is new block day for the Splendid Sampler to quilt along, and we have a fancy one today. It is Flowering Tree by Amy Friend. So here is the block that we're going to be starting tonight. It is this adorable tree, and this is foundation paper pieced. So that's different than the English paper piecing that we've been doing. This is foundation paper piecing, where we actually use, fruit flies everywhere, where we use paper as our foundation, and we are going to sew directly on our paper. So the paper is going to hold everything together while we sew. And there's a lot of little tricks to foundation paper piecing, but once you got the rhythm of it down, it becomes so relaxing and it's kind of magical. It's one of my most favorite things. You get to just start with blobs. You don't have to worry about perfect seam allowances or anything, and then all of a sudden you have a whole piece of art that you would have never been able to make in any other way. So it's exciting. And so I have not done this since we worked on the last Splendid Sampler. So I actually just had to watch one of my own videos from the last time around to relearn it. So I think it's back in my head again. So we'll walk through it here, you guys. We'll try and get the whole breadth of it tonight. So let's flip around, and I am going to pick some fabrics and let's get started. I'm super stoked. This is one of my favorite things. So, all right, flipping you around. Okay, here is my 3 areas I'm gonna have for paper piecing. I have my cutting area, my sewing area, and my pressing area as usual, but we are gonna be rotating between the 3 quite a lot. So, all right. Paula, yeah, that's cute. Alyssa, glad you had a good video to watch. Yeah, I had to, when I saw paper piecing, I tried to picture how to do it again in my head, and I just totally blanked. So I had to watch the video again, but I think I got all the ideas down again. So let's pick some fabrics. I'm gonna do white for my background. Where this dark blue is, I'm gonna do white just because I've set for myself with the Splendid Sampler 2 that I want my backgrounds in general to be the white. That's like one of my rules that I'm using. So let's do that. That'll be our background. Okay, I just kind of like laying it out so we can kind of get a gist of what it'll look like. And then for the rest, I want to use these colors here, our kind of blonde colors. And it's called Flowering Tree, so I kind of had in mind to use this fabric. Oh, that's like super flowery. You know what? All our fabrics are pretty flowery, honestly. This is kind of cute too. Yeah, a lot of these are flowery. We could do this kind of like pale yellow flowers too. But I don't know, I kind of liked this big honkin' crazy flowers. Oh, Amy, we are gonna go through it today from beginning to end. I'll show you kind of the way that I like doing it, and I think it's gonna work out fine. You know what? I might break out one of these other fabrics over here from the area that I haven't really used yet, because some of them are a little darker. I don't know, maybe that's too dark. Let's see if we can find something here. I need to find like a stem or a tree trunk color here. Maybe something like this yellow, just because it's so different from how like tan this is. Oh, that's even more contrasty, isn't it? Yeah, maybe this light color. So you can kind of see I'm rolling it up. I'm trying to get the same proportions as the picture here so I can kind of get a sense of it. That's awfully cute, right? I don't have any purple, Amy. I'm going with an all very light blonde quilt, so I don't have a lot of contrasting colors here. That's awfully contrasty. That's maybe too much though. I think I kind of like this. I think we got it. I think this is going to be our scheme right here. There are only 3 colors, so I think we got it there. So I'm going to scooch these away. See, I'm hoping my quilt in general kind of looks like this, like light, these blonde, light tan, and yellow colors when we're done. So that's why I'm using these. This would work too for a stem, but I think we'll go with that. Yeah, purple, I know a lot of other colors would look super fabulous with this. I do have a few colors that my side colors here. So these would all really pop really nicely. Like this would be so cool as the background, but they kind of go against my rules that I've set for myself for this quilt. I want to stick to these very light blonde colors with the white as a background, and then maybe every 5 blocks or so, I'm going to add just a little touch of one of these colors. So I want these to be like little sparks of color throughout the quilt. So I'm tending to stick to these blonde colors just because of the rules I've set for myself for this. So I think we're going to go with these 3. I think that'll be pretty. Just going to put my bin. I store my project in here while I'm not working on it. That can stay there. Okay. So I'm going to set these aside for now, and actually I'm going to pick some pencil colors. So I actually like color coding my foundation paper piecing while I do it, and I just find that it helps me sometimes. So I think I'm going to take this, this yellow is going to represent this, and let's get something totally different. Let's get this kind of gold tan. That's going to represent my background. And then everything else that's white will just be my white background. So we got that. Okay, so I am going to just kind of skip over the instructions here, and I'm going to just show you guys kind of my way of doing this. Paper piecing is absolutely fabulous for scraps. If you have a lot of scraps, I'm going to just use my full pieces here. If you are using cuts of fabric, it wouldn't hurt to just cut the pieces that she has here all listed. However, with this method, you kind of don't need to plan that much ahead. Oh, the container, I think it's just from Target, Amy. I love it though, it's a nice size. So here's the second page. This is printed out on my color printer though, and that uses a little thicker paper than just normal printer copy paper. So I actually printed out two copies on normal copy paper. And sometimes I work with just 1 copy, but sometimes, especially when there's triangles and odd shapes can start messing with your brain a little bit. So I like having 2 copies, one that I cut out to just look at the sizes of things, and then one that's our actual background. So all this will start to make sense as we get going here. But there's a few things I want us to look at when we look at this pattern. So you can see right here that we kind of have a left side and a right side. And in this case, I mean, it's not always like that paper piecing, but you'll notice that a lot of them have the letter A on them, and then a lot of them have the letter B. How paper piecing works is there are sections, and when you sew all those sections together, you get the full piece. So within the sections, it's broken up even more. So we have a section A. All of these are labeled A, A1, A2, A3, and then all of these are labeled B. Oftentimes, when you get a paper piecing pattern, it won't be divided up all nice like this already. A lot of times, it'll just look like the whole finished piece without these seam allowances, and this A and B will be touching. So you'll have to actually search out for the letters. You'll have to be like, oh, there's an A here. Oh, it's connected to this B. Okay, we gotta separate those. So the first thing you want to do with paper piecing is kind of separate your pieces. So you have all of the A's together, all the B's together, and then, etc. It can be the more complicated a piece gets, the more and more and more pieces you get. And they're not always the same. These happen to be mirror images of each other. That's not always like that. So you're in search of the letters. And you cut everything with a letter, and then everything with the other letter is a different section. So since there's a lot of cutting up sections, it might be real easy to lose what the heck we're working on. You know, like once we cut this piece out and we start rotating it and stuff, we're not gonna remember what we're looking at. So that's where the colored pencils come in. I like color coding it because once we start cutting this up, we're not gonna know what pieces are what anymore. So this is just a quick reference for us so we can remember what piece is what. Would you consider this a beginner project? I would call this slightly more than a beginner foundation paper piecing. And the reason why is because it's got a whole lot of triangles in it. And sometimes triangles can confuse your brain a little bit because we're going to be working with, you know, things being flipped in different directions and all that. So I would call this like one level up, or maybe 2 levels up from a beginner foundation paper piecing. But it's all in all, you'll get the whole idea whether it's a beginner or not. It's not going to matter. Once you know paper piecing, you're going to know it. So all right, let's color code this thing. So the white is going to be my background, so I'm going to just leave that white. The yellow I wanted to be the tree trunk, so it looks like it's this piece here and then these skinny pieces here. So I'm just adding some quick color. This is just because it gets confusing real quick. This is a beginner paper piecing from the sense that when we put them together, it's not so hard. Sometimes when you have to put all the pieces back, all the sections back, that can sometimes get pretty difficult. Not difficult, but intricate. So from that sense, I would say this is a beginner piece since we're just really sewing 2 sections together. I don't think you need a light box, Gretchen. So I'll show you how I do it here, and then you can kind of see if you want a light box or not. So there's several different ways to do this. We did a lot of this for the Splendid Sampler, and I did a little paper piecing before that. And so that's kind of where I learned. I tried a bunch of different things, and this is my favorite way of doing it. And I might not actually need that extra printout, but I might show you how to use it that way too. So, but this is what I like doing first because, like I said, it's real easy to get confused. I would not skip this step, especially if it's your first time doing this. And you know, it might not be as necessary for this particular paper piecing, but I'm sure we're going to be doing more paper piecing in the future here, and it's going to get more intricate. So I would recommend just throwing some color down. Oh, you learned on the dress. Yeah, that was a difficult one. Not necessarily difficult. Like with all this paper piecing, it doesn't get really more difficult. It just gets more intricate. So, all right, we got our color down. So now no matter what, I'm always going to know that this kind of gold or brown color is going to be this. The white is going to stay white, and then this yellow is going to be this yellow. That's my color coding. So I'm going to trim this out. That's where we'll start. So again, I want to keep all the A's together and all the B's together. They've made it easy by already separating it for us. But like I said earlier, you might get a pattern where none of it's separated. It might just look like this with labels all over it, and then you have to find the different sections. In this case, it's separated for us. So I'm going to cut that out. This happens to add the seam allowance for us as well. That doesn't always happen in paper piecing patterns either. However, since it's here, I will keep it added. We will always be adding a seam allowance with every single piece that we do. So technically I don't need to know that there's a seam allowance here because I'm always going to know, because there's always going to be a seam allowance. So I'm just kind of roughly cutting this out. Yep, I'm using my paper scissors. Exactly, Amy. Don't use your fancy fabric scissors for this. All right, so this is my B section all cut out. So it looks like it goes B1, B2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9 and 10. So there's 10 pieces to this side, and there's 10 pieces to this side as well. All right. Step 1, all of the pieces, the sections cut out. So we have our A section and our B section, and let's get rid of the scrappies. I do not put a special needle in my machine, Gretchen. I'm just using my normal sewing needle. I think I have a 70, what is it, 70-14? I forget the second number always, but I have a 70 needle in, I think. All right, our 2 sections here. So, all right, like I said, we got our section. These are all A's, and then there's numbers on it. So you can see A1, then A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, A7, A8, A9, and A10. So when we sew this, we're going to go in order. We're going to start with A1, then we'll move on to A2, and so forth. So one other key feature that you need to know is that this is going to be the wrong side of the piece when we're done. This side is going to be the right side. And if you just want to remember that, I'm going to put right side, right side. So what I mean by right side and wrong side is like fabric, the right and wrong side of fabric. So in quilting, the right side of fabric is the part with the pretty pattern on. The wrong side of the fabric is the back of the fabric. So when we are done, this is going to be where we've colored here, where all the lines are. That's going to be the wrong side of the fabric. So when we flip it around, we're going to have the right side of the fabric here. Amy, it will all come together. You don't have to worry about seam allowance at all right now. Actually, I'm going to just be cutting crazy blobs, and it's all going to work out. So for now, I'm going to set B to the side. I'm not going to start B until I'm completely done with A. So we're going to just set that to the side. And okay, some other things that we're going to need. I have a little bit of glue. You don't need this. You could use a pin, but I like using glue, and I'll use this on the first piece and maybe some of these bigger pieces. So I have this is just some sew line glue. It's just like, you know, a little glue stick. You could use a child's, like a kid school glue stick. And then the other thing I have is I have a postcard. And yes, you'll hear me say, Amy, you'll hear me say the crazy blobs and the blobs, all blob related things a lot when we come to foundation paper piecing. That's kind of what I love. I never have to worry about cutting a perfect piece. I just cut a big blob, and then it turns out perfect with perfectly magically cut seam allowances. It's kind of cool. So all right, some tools, the glue, a postcard. I like using a postcard because you want like a heavy piece of something. A business card would work well, or like those cards that come in magazines. But what you want is you want it kind of stiff, and you want like a nice sharp edge to it, just like a thin sharp edge like a postcard. So I have a postcard on board, and you're going to need a ruler that can measure 1/4 inch. And if you want to get real fancy, instead of a ruler that has a 1/4 inch, you can get an add a quarter ruler. So this is an add a quarter. Oh, there you can see it, add a quarter ruler. And I did put a link to this in my post. But if you're just beginning, I mean, this is fabulous, and I'll show you how we'll use it, but you don't need it. You just need a ruler that has a 1/4 inch seam allowance on, and you're going to need a rotary cutter as well. So, okay, let's give this a go. So we have our piece here. Remember, this is the wrong side, and this will be the right side. We are going to start with A1. So all the number 1 pieces, so like A1, B1, and if this had more sections in it, all the 1 pieces we're going to treat a little bit different than all the other numbers, all the other pieces in a section. All the other pieces will be treated exactly the same as each other, but A1, the 1s are treated a little different. So we're going to start with A1. So I'm noticing already that's my brown color, so that's this fabric. So how I'm going to start is, and this is great for scraps or using like tiny little sections. You can also fussy cut with this. It's just kind of fun. So, all right. I also want like just a nice fabric scissors too. So we need to find a piece of fabric that is as big as our A1 piece plus a generous seam allowance. That's where the blob comes in. So a lot of times what people say is you want a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and they cut a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, but that is, I would not recommend that. I would recommend cutting quite a bit larger, at least a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I just roughly cut a blob, but ultimately they are going to end up being perfect 1/4 inch seam allowances, but you want to make sure that you are covering this entire piece plus that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I need at least that much fabric to do this. So I'm going to do that. Diane, you can use the pattern and cut the pieces that they recommend. I just find with paper piecing that you don't need to. You just need to find your fabric and then start cutting right on there. But you can, just so you have so you don't have fabric everywhere, you could cut those pieces and you'll be fine. I'm just kind of showing you how I like doing it. So I need to find a piece of a section on here that I want to use for my A1 piece. And remember, it needs to be as big as the A1 plus the generous seam allowance. Gretchen, I'm not going to cut both sides at the same time just because that's going to get confusing real fast. Sometimes I'll do that. This would be a great pattern to do that on, actually. But since we're just starting, we're going to go one little bit at a time so we don't get totally confused. All right, A1. So first thing we need to know is our fabric needs to be face down, because remember, this is the right side, this is the wrong side. So we need the fabric to mimic that. So the wrong side and then the right side. So remember, face down, that's important, especially since we're working with a lot of triangles here. And let's just find a piece. I'll just find, we'll start at a nice clean corner like this. I'm gonna just lay my foundation piece, this section on here, and I'm gonna imagine this piece with that generous seam allowance. So I can see, I got this, there's at least a 1/4 inch from this line to the edge of the fabric here. So I kind of just need a blob like that, right? I can kind of lift this up. Here's the edge of the A1 piece. I need at least a 1/4 inch blob around there. So I'm going to just start by cutting a big old blob. I have a 1/4 inch, at least a 1/4 inch from this point to the edge. So let's just cut ourselves a blob. And I'm going to start with a super generous seam allowance, and we will work from there. Don't worry about using up fabric. It's just a tiny, tiny bit of fabric. It's not gonna ruin our lives, and it's gonna be so much nicer that we've covered our entire spot versus it being too little. Like if you have too little of fabric, then you almost have to start over. So it's better to have too big of a piece than too little. So now you can kind of see, this is definitely the size of our A1 piece plus a good generous, you know, I always like going at least a 1/2 inch seam allowance around. Ultimately, it'll just need to be a 1/4 inch, but we're doing our bigger blob, right? So there's no measuring, no nothing. I just got my big blob there. So I'm actually noticing that this is pretty, this kind of got this little bend here, so I'm gonna just press that quick. Normally I wouldn't do that, but I don't want that little bend there. Okay. So now we're gonna do the last part to A1, and that is just to put a dab of glue on there. So I'm gonna put a dab of glue right in the middle of A1 here. There you can kind of see through. This is just to temporarily hold it there. And I'm gonna place it in my piece. So it's in that fabric piece, so it still has that generous seam allowance all the way around, right? And remember, face down. Face down, you want the good side facing down. And there we have a dab of glue in, and just double check. Here's the size of our A1 piece, and we definitely have that generous seam allowance around it. And you know what? That is it. We are done with the A1 piece. So that's all there is to the one pieces with foundation paper piecing. That's all there is. It's just cut a blob, glue it down, that's it. So we're gonna actually move on now to the A2 piece. So like I said, the A1 pieces, the one pieces we treat differently. We treat just like how we did here. Every other number we are gonna treat the same as each other. So it's gonna be treated different than the A1 piece, but from here on out, we're treating everything the same. So that'll be, so just keep everything we do for A2, we're gonna do for the rest. Kathy says a light box or even holding it up to the light would assure you have it covered. Another thing you can do, so yes, you could, like I could hold this up to the light and kind of see that I have a big enough blob, but I have a few other tricks for that as well. So if you're unsure, one of those tricks you can do is print out, let's get a different one. You can print out another copy, and you can cut out the piece that you're working on. So let's say it was that A1 piece right here. There. So this could be your guide piece. So then you could take, this is just a tip, like so you get enough space. You could take that piece and lay it down. Remember, put the right side of your fabric down, and you could lay that there and see that you have the right amount of space. So we could put a dab of glue and then trim out that piece. And then that's another way that you would know that you have a big enough piece. So it's handy to have that extra printout just in case you want to work that way. But I'm gonna keep showing you this way because I think it works great. And you'll definitely, this sounds totally confusing here at first, but I promise you, after a little while, you'll get into the rhythm of doing this. All right, so we're gonna move on. A1, again, we just glued down that piece. It's a piece that's as big as the A1 plus the generous seam allowance. Then you're done. It's glued down. That piece is done. All right, next up, A2. So the first thing we're gonna look at here is what is the line? You know, we have all these lines here. It can get confusing with all the lines, but what is the line that is in between A2 and everything that happened before? So right now, the only thing that's happened before is A1. So the line that's between A2 and A1 is this line right here. So that is the only line we are concerned with. We can imagine none of this other stuff exists. So that is the line we want right there. So what we're going to do is grab your postcard and you're going to put it on everything that happened before A2. So I'm going to put it on, in this case, A1, and I'm going to put the edge of the postcard right on that line, that A2 line that's between A2 and A1. See, so right there? You got it? So here's A1, A2. I'm putting it on that line right in between there with the postcard. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this down here, and I'm going to flip up the paper, and I'm going to score it all along my postcard here. I'm going to pretend that I'm not going to worry about crossing over these other lines. I'm going to ignore everything. So I'm going to score it, and I'm going to fold it all the way over, and I'm going to press all the way up and all the way down. So we got this good bend in the paper there right along that line, and it extends. All right? That also exposes part of our blob here. So we're going to keep this folded here, and we're going to grab our ruler. And while this is still folded, I'm going to cut this to 1/4 inch. So you can see I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this ruler. I'm going to put that 1/4 inch line along the edge of my postcard and basically where this fold is. So right on that fold. And we're going to cut that out. There we go. That's our first cut. So our blob is becoming not a blob anymore. So this is a scrap. We don't need that. And then, see, look, we have a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance now. So if I fold this back, we are going to have just a perfectly lovely cut there. So even when we start out with blobs, we're going to end up with perfect 1/4 inch seam allowances using this technique. So I kind of love that. Okay, that's step one. Step two is we need to address this A2 piece. So the A2, first thing, what fabric is it? It is this yellow. So our yellow was this. Ooh, we don't have that much left of this. Okay. And what I like doing, well, Kathy, I do have the add a quarter ruler. I'll show you how to do that next. So don't worry, I will definitely show you how to use this. I just wanted to show you that you can use a normal ruler first. So when we cut that 1/4 inch seam allowance, that's where we're going to use the add a quarter ruler later, but I will show you that in a moment here. So all right, our A2 piece here, it's this long skinny piece. Triangles can be tricky because of the geometry of it. You know, when you flip it one way, it looks, you know, the angles all change and stuff. So what I like to do to help myself out is the edge that it's folded on like this. I like to put that edge along a straight edge of the fabric. And sometimes I'll cut a straight edge. So like here's that fold. I want to lay the A2 piece on the fabric. And remember, fabric is always face down. I'm going to put the A2 so it's on the fabric, but I'm going to look at it. I have this fold here. I want that fold to kind of line up with a straight edge here. So see what I'm saying? This is our fold we just did. The A2 piece is on the fabric, and this fold is parallel to an edge here. So, okay, so I have that. It's a good, generous seam allowance. Now again, I want to cut my generous seam allowance all the way around this A2 piece. My fabric needs to be as big as the A2 plus the generous seam allowance. So I got my straight edge here. There's definitely from here to here, that's pretty generous. That's almost an inch. So I kind of need it to go up here and then blob down here. So it kind of angles up. So I'm just going to cut an angle up here. It needs to be just bigger than that 1/4 inch, right? So we'll go like that. And then I just kind of need to connect it from here to there, bigger than that 1/4 inch. So I'm just kind of peeking. This is definitely bigger than the 1/4 inch. And I'll show you how you can test this as well. We'll do that next. Okay, this potentially is our next piece. So remember the edge that I was making sure that it was lining up to? This fold? That edge, we gotta remember that edge. That edge we are going to match up with that 1/4 inch seam allowance that we just trimmed. Remember we cut that nice 1/4 inch seam allowance? We are gonna match up those two edges. So now in theory, we'll sew on there, and when we flip it, it will cover this A2 space. But we're gonna test. So I'm gonna line up those two edges. You know, the nice edge that we cut, and then that straight edge that we picked out. I'm gonna flip that over. And I am going to pretend sew. So that line that we folded, that one that's in between A2 and A1, I'm gonna pin along that line. And I'm imagining that I'm sewing along the line. That's what I'm doing to pin. So what we're doing now is testing to see if I've placed my piece okay. So there we go. I've basically pretend sewed on there. So now I'm gonna pretend ironed. So I'm going to just go over my pins there and then just finger press along the edge. And I'm gonna flip that around again. So now I'm just gonna check, did that piece cover my entire A2 piece plus that generous seam allowance? So I'm just gonna peek. Oh yeah, that's a way big seam allowance there. That's definitely more than a 1/4 inch. What about down here? That's important. It goes down to this point. Do I have enough fabric down here? Yep, we got enough. It's not a lot, but it's more than a 1/4 inch. And then let's go up to this point here. Do we have a 1/4 inch that way? Oh yeah, there's plenty. So let's say this wasn't a 1/4 inch here. Let's say I wanted this bigger. I'm like, oh, okay, wow, good thing I tested it. I need to scooch it down, right? So I can take these pins out, scooch it just a hair in the direction it needed to be. So I just scooched it down a little bit, maybe even a little more. And then I'm gonna pretend sew. With triangles, it's pretty important, I think, to do this testing, like this pretend sewing with your pins. I think I've been saying needles, I mean pins. Okay, let's pretend press. If you just have little rectangles and little squares, you don't have to do all this testing all the time because you can see, you know, a square is gonna flip to another square over there. But angles with triangles change and can get a little like brain crazy. So this testing is good. So all right, now let's check. We still have our big seam allowance this way. We still have plenty, 1/4 inch that way. And we have a little bit more down here, which is great. So now we know that this has been placed, this fabric placed right there is good to go. So now we need to actually sew. Let's sew those pieces together. So I'm gonna take my fake sewing out and I'm gonna just keep holding the piece there. With these small pieces like this, they don't move. I mean, like they usually just kind of stay together, but if you're worried about it moving on you, just leave your pin in there. So I took one pin out and the other one's in there. We'll take that other one out as we sew. Okay, to the sewing machine. So some things you need to know for your sewing machine. We're just gonna do a straight stitch. I just have my normal like 50 weight Aurifil in here, my 50 weight thread. Just any thread you have is gonna be fine. The one thing you do wanna do, oh, I didn't test my tension. I'm just gonna throw it there. one thing you do want to do is you want to make your stitch length a lot less. And the reason for that is we're going to ultimately want to take this paper off, and each little stitch makes a little perforation point in the paper. And the more perforation points, that's going to make it easier to tear later. So you want to do just a little lower stitch length, a little smaller stitch length. So I'm just doing that over on my dial over here. Anything you recommend besides pins? You actually don't need pins or anything. I could just hold it here and kind of do my test and just peek. So you actually don't need it. You could actually even use some glue. You could use just a little dab of glue there and flip it over, pretend that you're sewing it, and then check. However, I really think the pins work the best, so I do still kind of recommend a pin. If you have like a needle or something for embroidery or other hand piecing something, you could use a needle instead of a pin. All right, so everything's in place. All right, so I want to sew right along that A2 and A1 line. However, I do not want to cross any of the other lines. So see that A2 line kind of crosses over into this A10 area, and it also crosses over into this A8 area. I don't want to cross over. I want to stay exactly on that line. So I'm going to start stitching right at that point there, and I'm going to back tack it to hold it in place, and then I'm going to stop right at the point where it meets here and back tack it again. Back tacking is just when you go forward a stitch and then backwards a stitch and then forward a stitch again and sew your line. That kind of holds things in place. So all right, the cool thing is that I don't have to worry about seam allowances. Like I don't have my little business card on here for my perfect seam allowance. It's like coloring. It's like a coloring book. I'm just gonna go right on the line here. So that's why I kind of love paper piecing. I can just make my blobs. I can just sew along the line. I don't have to have perfect seam allowances at all. So, all right, we're gonna do it. All right, a couple stitches forward and then back to just back tack it. And now I'm gonna continue along that line. I'm gonna move that pin. I'm right on that line. And then I'm at the end. It's right where it meets that A8. And then I'm just gonna back tack it and then forward again. I'm using an old 1970s Kenmore Sears Kenmore sewing machine, Amy. Nothing fancy at all. You don't need anything fancy to do this. All right, so there we go. I've sewn along that line. See how small my stitches are? They're a little bit smaller, but I've gone between that A2 and that A1 piece all the way down. I started right at that line and I ended right at that line with a little back tack. So that's it. I always like trimming the threads right away because it can get messy fast. So I cut them from the top right by the paper, and then I flip it around and I just snip those too. And toss those. Okay, next up we head to the iron. So we kind of it's a three-part thing. We're on our cutting area, then we're to the sewing machine, and then to the iron. And it's that triad that we're gonna go over and over again. Okay, so we're gonna press this, but when you press with paper piecing, you always want the printed side down because you don't want to get these lines on your iron. So I'm going to put that down, and I'm going to first give that a little press just to kind of set the seam. There we go. And then I'm finger press it. I always start by finger pressing it. So I fold it where it's on the seam, and I just kind of press it with my fingers along the seam. And then it'll come to a part where, you know, we've stopped that stitching. We're going to just extend that by just pressing, keeping on pressing along that edge with our fingers. I like to have that, just extend that before I press it for real. And then we'll go over over that piece. Oops, sorry guys. Oh, you use a wooden roller or stick to press, so you don't need your iron nearby. Oh, that's nice. That's always handy. Okay, there we are. So let's take a look at that. Let's go back to the center here. That is it for A2, if you can believe it. We got 2 blobs back there now. So it's just kind of crazy. It's just going to look like all these blobs, but the more we surround each piece, the more defined it's going to get. And that's going to happen, I think, right when we do this A3. We're all of a sudden going to have this really nice A2 piece here. But that is it. That's the whole process. So we're going to actually move on to A3 now. And I promise you this will start making sense after you do it a little while. We'll go through it again. So let's do A3. So first up, we are going to get the postcard out again. And we got to find that line that is in between A3, that's the piece we're working on now, A3 and everything that came before. And in this case, it's this line right here, between A3 and A2. We don't have to worry about A10 because that didn't come before. We don't have to worry about A8 because that didn't come before. All that came before was this A2 and A1. And then the only line in between that and A3 is this right here. So there we go. That's our line we're concerned with. Let's get our postcard. And let's cover up everything that happened before. So we have that A3 exposed. A3 is what we're working on now. And we're going to fold the paper up on that postcard. We're going to extend it all the way. And now we're going to trim again. So before I used a 1/4 inch seam allowance with my ruler. There's another little fun tool called an add a 1/4 ruler. It's this ruler that has a little ridge on it, and it's a 1/4 inch wide. I can just butt that up against my postcard. It's like you can physically bump it up, meaning I don't have to think, I don't have to measure, I don't have to do anything. I can just grab this and go bloop, blob, attended to. So I'm just pushing that right up against the postcard and that fold that we just did. And I'm going to use that and trim off all of our extra. Then we have our perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance again for our next piece. That would be easier than cutting each block if you're unable to stand at the table and cut. I think I missed what we're talking about there, Jean. All right, but that's it. We got our next perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. I can fold this back. We can take a peek. Look, we're starting to shape our stuff right there. All right, so A3, it is this brown, which is our flowery fabric again. So let's get that out. All right, so again, I like taking the fold that we just did, and I like making that edge parallel to a straight edge on the fabric. And you can cut that special. You can cut a straight edge wherever, especially if you're fussy cutting or something. So I need a piece of fabric that's as big as that A3 plus this generous seam allowance, right? As big as the piece plus the generous seam allowance. So we'll go right here. So I'm going to line up that fold so it's parallel to our fabric. Remember, good side is down. The right side of the fabric is always down. All right, so now this A3 piece, the fold is kind of parallel to, it's parallel to an edge. So now we need to make sure that we got our generous 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if I look up here, that is not very generous. That is not a lot, so I'm going to scooch down. This way we got plenty, this way we got plenty, and we got our parallel edge here. That's about our generous 1/4 inch seam allowance away too. All right, so I think we just need to come down here. We're cutting our blob. If I can grab my scissors. So the blob needs to be bigger than that A3, so about right here. So I'm going to just kind of trim.
move the fabric out of the way, kind of trim up that way. And then we just kind of need to come down this way, and that will give us a big enough area around that A3. And I'm doing pretty big chunks around, but like I said, I love that you can just cut blobs for paper piecing and have it all work out. So this edge, that's that edge that we made parallel to the fold. That's the edge that we are going to match up with our little perfect edge that we trimmed here with our add a quarter ruler. So it was this edge. I'm just going to kind of center it to start out. You know, right sides together, I'm matching up the two edges. And now we need to run our test again, because I don't know if this piece needs to go down here or if it needs to go up here. We're going to test that right now. So right sides together. Let's flip that around and get our little pins. And let's pretend sew. So we're going on that line in between A3 and that A2 piece. And I like doing two lines or two pins because then it can't pivot or anything. All right, so let's pretend press. All right, look, we're starting to get our shape here. That's cool. So we're pretend pressing, and let's flip it over. Now here's where we assess. Where the fabric is now in this test position, does it cover our A3 piece plus the generous seam allowance? So let's, I mean, at the top it looks, yeah, there's plenty. The side, there's plenty. And the bottom, there's actually plenty there as well. I'm looking at this point here. It's a little smaller. I mean, this is smaller than up here. There's a lot of seam allowance up there, but it's still a generous 1/4 inch, so I don't have to move the fabric at all. That's the benefit of doing big blobs. The bigger the blob, the less you have to shimmy things all over the place. So I'm just ready to sew now. I folded this back, and I'll keep that bottom pin, but let's just remove that top pin. And I'm going to sew, remember, just on that line. So I'm going to start here. I don't want to cross over into a different number. I'm going to start there, sew down here, and then I'm going to stop right at that point again. So let's shimmy this to the machine. Our little trifecta of movement again. Cutting, machine, and then pressing. Okay, so I'm just going to hold my threads here, and there we go. Let's back tack. Remember, we have our stitch length smaller. All right, now that I have that in there, I'm going to remove this pin, and then we'll sew along that line. Oh yeah, it's a bit early there, Helen. And we're going to stop right when we intersect with that other piece, that A8 piece. Back tack, and then forward again. There we go. That is our next piece sewn. So here we are again, between the A3 and everything that happened before. It's that line we started there and we sewed down to there. So next up, remember, I like trimming those threads right away. So trim the top from the paper, flip it over, and trim the bottom. Ooh, got some excess there. There we go. Okay. I always kind of like to peek. Yee, look, peeking. We got this little sliver there. All right, cool. So let's press. Yep, got a shimmy. You see branches, Gretchen, yay. Yep. So, all right, I like, remember, we want to put the printed side face down. And I'm going to just give it a little press to kind of make the piece nice and just kind of set the seam. And then we're going to finger press it again. So let's open it up and run our finger along the part that we sewed and then extend it past the part that we sewed. You know, see, it flops open there. I'm going to just press past that. Once we have that, let's do that. You know, we're running late, but I think we're gonna do one more piece just so I can run through the whole thing quicker and you can kind of see the whole thing in motion. So that's that though, that is our next piece. That is piece 3. So we got A1, A2, A3 all done. So let's quickly do this A4 and see if we can get that guy done. So all right, first up, we got to determine what that line is that we're cutting, and it is between A4 and everything that happened before. So that's A3, A2, A1. So it's this line right here. So that's the line. We're going to set this down, cover up everything that we did before with the postcard, and expose that A4. There we go. Postcard. Plop this up. Give that a good fold. Grab the add a quarter ruler or your normal ruler. Boink. Put that on there. Easy peasy. Rotary cutter cut. Don't have to think about anything. Shimmy that back down. Fold it back. All right. We need to find that A4, so in fabric. So that is yellow. The yellow represents our yellow fabric here. I'm going to match that. I'm going to put the A4 so it's against the fabric, the wrong side of the fabric here. And we're going to find a straight edge with that we can line with that fold. And there, that's a good generous seam allowance. What about down here? I think we can shimmy it up a little bit, get a little bit more seam allowance, and that's good. So I'm going to cut around like that, cutting our blob. That's plenty big. And we'll just shimmy down this side here. There we go. So this is that side that we lined up. So I'm going to take that side and match it with that side we just trimmed, which is right here. I'm just kind of guessing where it's going. We're going to run our test. All right, so let's put a pin between that A4 and A3. A4 and A3. All right, let's pretend press. And now let's do our check. Did we cover that entire A4 piece plus our generous seam allowance? Yep, we got tons up there. We got, ooh, we're pretty close here though. Look, here's that bottom point. We are pushing our 1/4 inch there. I don't like that. And then this edge is plenty. So I'm gonna shimmy that down. This is not enough. That doesn't make me feel safe. So I'm gonna move it all down that way. Let's take those pins out. So we need to move this way. And I'm gonna go about right there. Now we should be good. I can do a test again, but I'm pretty confident that we moved it far enough down. So I'm gonna just get to sewing. And I don't have the pins in. I can just hold the piece there. Since we're working with small pieces, it'll kind of hold itself together. And I'm gonna just flip it. And we will sew along that edge. Again, only that line. I'm not gonna extend beyond. Get it in there with that smaller stitch length. If you go a tish over the line, it's not going to matter all that much. But I try and stay right on that line. I love that I don't have to worry about a seam allowance. I just have to worry about stitching on a line. That's it. All right, done sewing. Let's snip those little bits off. We're starting to get in a rhythm here. We're going to work on this tomorrow again too. I think we can easily finish at least this side tomorrow. And we're going to totally get in a rhythm tomorrow. We'll go through the whole process again tomorrow, but we're going to just start cruising along, and you'll kind of see why I like it so much. I don't have to measure anything. I just get in my little rhythm, and it's easy peasy and relaxing. All the things that I hate, I don't have to worry about anymore. Like I hate cutting things perfectly, like measuring things perfectly, and I hate getting that perfect scant quarter-inch seam allowance. I always struggle with those two things, so I get to avoid that completely with foundation paper piecing. There we go. Done with that next piece. So that piece didn't take long at all, like once we got cruising there. So here's the start of our little tree here. So let's bring it back around here. So tomorrow, you guys, we will just keep going on this, and you can start to see things develop, shapes develop. So like this shape is pretty developed. This shape is pretty developed. Soon we'll be chopping off that whole top with white, so that will frame up this whole area. Once we do that, and look, then we'll have, you know, the start of our shape coming. So the more you add on, the more pieces you keep adding on. Each piece that you add on slices a bit of the pieces before. So, you know, our next piece, A5, is going to slice up our A4. And then, you know, eventually once we get to like A10, that's going to slice everything that came before. It's going to slice right across all of these, which will help frame our design even more. So, all right, guys, and then, you know, we have this other side as well. You might be like, oh, but those are going the same direction. It's because, remember, we're working on the wrong side. So ultimately, it'll be like this. And once we sew them together and flip it, there we go. It'll be like that, and this side will be going this direction. So yes, I am here 8:30 p.m. Central Time every weeknight. I actually won't be here next week, but I will be here tomorrow, and we'll be continuing this. I think we'll get this whole side done easy. I think we'll actually start on our B side as well. So, but tonight we got through A1 through A4, and so we'll start tomorrow on this big A5 piece. But that is paper piecing, you guys. I know it's a lot. It's a lot of little details, but I'm telling you, just follow how I'm doing it here, and you know, hang out with me tomorrow. We'll go through this. Feel free to ask whatever questions you have. I love that you can just make blobs and they turn out perfect. Like even the seam allowances. Look, we're even going to end up with perfect seam allowances, even though we started out with blobs. So, all right, I'm going to flip you guys around, and we will call it an evening. Hello again. Yes, so this is, let's shimmy. It's definitely one of those things that that it takes a little bit to figure it out, but once you got it, it is just magic. Like, look, how else would you piece a tiny little skinny piece like this? If you saw a quilt like that and you've never heard of paper piecing, you'd be like, oh my God, that person is a magic, you know, wizard to be able to sew a tiny skinny piece like that. And it's all done with paper piecing, and I love it. It's just magic. And yeah, so we will continue this tomorrow. Yeah, I think we'll finish this whole side of the tree. And yeah, I think we'll get really far on this tomorrow. So I hope you give it a try, you guys. Oh, you're not scared. You're not scared anymore. You were sweating this. Oh, that's good, Gretchen. Yes, it's definitely a mind boggler. But once you got some systems down, it really ends up being super easy, and it really ends up being just calming and fun. And yeah, today it even probably seemed a little overwhelming, but I promise you, we'll keep doing it. We're going to do it tomorrow, and we'll do it again. There will be more of this in the Splendid Sampler too, and you'll get it. And if you don't, I'm here to ask questions. So, all right, guys, I will be here tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Central Time, again, here on Facebook. I'm on the Penguin and Fish page here on Facebook. And the replay of this will go up on YouTube at Penguin and Fish Movies on YouTube. And this is a new block, so it will go in the Splendid Sampler 2 category, and then there will be a grouping for this block. So you can just look up where it's block, what are we on? Block, is this block 8 or block 9? I can't remember, but it will be called The Flowering Tree by Amy Friend. So you can just look for Flowering Tree, and all the videos for this will go there, starting with this one. So, all right, I will see you guys tomorrow on Friday, and we will continue this paper piecing. It's going to be fun. So see you then. Have a great evening. Good night.